Jamila sat in her dimly lit dormitory, staring at the ceiling as rain tapped gently on the window. Her chest felt tight, a dull ache that had become all too familiar. Some nights were harder than others, tonight was one of those nights. She clutched the edges of her blanket as tears rolled down her cheeks. Her mind drifted to a time when life felt simpler, safer. Before Idris. Before the weight of silence had settled in her throat like a stone. Jamila had always been the girl with the brightest smile, the one whose soft recitation of the Quran left elders in awe. Now, that girl felt like a stranger, someone she wasn't sure she'd ever meet again. Why does healing feel like this? She whispered to herself, her voice breaking. The ringing of her phone startled her. It was her mother. Jamila, my light, Khadija's gentle voice came through. You sound tired. Is everything okay? For a moment, Jamila considered brushing it off, but something inside her cracked. I don't know if I'm okay, Mama, she admitted. You will be, Khadija said firmly, her voice steady. We'll face this together, my child. The pain doesn't own you. You own your story. Idris's hands trembled as he stared at the sealed envelope. For hours, he had sat at his desk, pen poised, unable to find the words to apologize for the unforgivable. How do you even begin to ask forgiveness for something so vile? His eyes burned with tears as he scribbled and scratched out yet another failed attempt. When the letter finally arrived at Jamila's door, she froze, recognizing the handwriting. Her chest tightened as she unfolded the paper, the words blurring through the tears welling in her eyes. Jamila. I know I am the last person you want to hear from, and I do not deserve your time. I have spent every moment since that night consumed by shame and regret. I have no excuse, no justification, only remorse. You were kind, pure, and undeserving of the harm I inflicted. Please, if your heart allows, grant me a chance to apologize in person. Not for my sake, but for yours. I hope you find peace. Her mother found her staring at the letter, tears streaming silently. You don't have to do this, Khadija said gently. But Jamila shook her head. I need to face him, to take back my power. The cafe was quiet except for the hum of conversations and the clink of coffee cups. Jamila sat stiffly at the corner table, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. Across from her, Idris shuffled his feet, the weight of his guilt written across his face. Why did you do it? Jamila's voice cracked, breaking the heavy silence. Her question wasn't angry, but it carried the raw pain of someone seeking an answer that could never undo the past. Idris swallowed hard. I don't know. I was lost, Jamila, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was invincible, that nothing could touch me. I didn't see you as a person, and for that, I will never forgive myself. Tears welled in Jamila's eyes. She looked away, her chest tightening. You took everything from me. My safety, my peace, my trust in people. Do you know what it feels like to wake up every day and carry that? I don't, Idris admitted, his voice trembling. But I see it now, and I will carry the shame for the rest of my life. I'm not asking for you to forget, I know I don't deserve that. I just want you to be free. Jamila exhaled deeply. Forgiving him wouldn't erase her pain, but holding on to the hatred was a burden she no longer wanted. I forgive you, Idris, she said softly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Not for you, but for me. The auditorium was packed, the murmurs of anticipation buzzing like bees. Jamila stood backstage, clutching the edges of her scarf, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never spoken to a crowd this large, let alone shared the story that had once shattered her world. As she stepped onto the stage, the light seemed blinding, but then she saw a young girl in the front row. She was no older than 15, her wide eyes filled with something Jamila recognized, fear and hope interwoven. "I was once like you," Jamila began, her voice trembling. The room fell silent. "I was silent because I believed no one would hear me, and even if they did, they wouldn't care." She recounted her story with raw honesty, not just the pain but the shame, the nights spent questioning her worth, and the battles to reclaim her identity. Tears welled in her eyes, but she pushed through, her voice steady. "When I broke my silence, I found freedom. And in that freedom, I found purpose," she said, scanning the crowd. "To every person here who feels voiceless, your story matters. You matter." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. That young girl was the first to stand, tears streaming down her face. Jamila had touched her soul. The scent of freshly brewed tea filled the modest community hall where a women's support meeting was underway. As Imam Yusuf addressed the group, his voice trembled with an earnestness that wasn't there before. "I failed my own family," he began, looking directly at the circle of women seated before him. "But through failure, Allah granted me the chance to learn about justice, accountability, and humility." The room was silent, save for the soft rustle of someone adjusting their seat. Among those gathered was Hawa, a young woman whose trembling hands clutched a notebook. She had come here for solace, a sanctuary to tell her story. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated, tears forming in her eyes. "I never thought I'd have the courage to say this," she said softly. "But seeing you here, Imam, admitting your mistakes, it gives me hope." Idris stood at the back of the room, his head bowed. As Hawa continued, her story mirrored what Jamila had endured, betrayal and silence. Idris clenched his fists, realizing the gravity of his actions. Later, he approached Hawa, offering quiet words of encouragement. It was a small moment, but for Idris, it was the first step in proving his remorse through actions, not words. Jamila hadn't expected to meet anyone like Aminu. She wasn't even looking. Years of guarding her heart had made her believe that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet, here he was, his warm eyes meeting hers as she stepped off the stage after another impassioned speech. "Your story," he said, extending his hand, "it's powerful." She smiled politely, used to compliments, but something about Aminu's tone was different. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. Over the next few months, their paths crossed again and again, at conferences, community events, and even a chance meeting at a coffee shop. Each time, Aminu chipped away at the walls she had so carefully built. When he finally confessed his feelings, Jamila froze. Could she let someone in after everything she had endured? Could she risk the vulnerability love demanded? "I see you, Jamila," Aminu said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "Not your past. Not your scars. Just you." That night, she cried for hours, tears of fear, of hope, of release. By dawn, she knew her answer. Love wasn't a luxury. It was a gift. Yes, she whispered to herself, ready to embrace the light of her second chance. As the soft rays of dawn streamed through the window, Jamila cradled her newborn twins, their tiny breaths synchronized with her heartbeat. The silence of the room felt sacred, a stark contrast to the stormy path that had led her here. "You are proof that Allah's mercy endures," she whispered, her voice trembling as tears slipped down her cheeks. Years ago, she had sat on the cold floor of her room, questioning whether joy was a gift meant for someone like her. She had felt broken, robbed of innocence, and burdened by a pain too heavy to carry. Yet, here she was now, holding not just her children, but the promise of a life renewed. Her husband, Aminu, walked in, his face glowing with pride as he gently kissed her forehead. "They have your strength," he said softly, gazing at their sleeping babies. In that moment, Jamila realized her journey was not just about survival, it was about creating a legacy of hope for others like her. "Every scar tells a story," she thought, "and mine is a story of triumph." As she lay her twins in their crib, Jamila closed her eyes and prayed. Her heart was full, her soul finally at peace.